There are phrases that they sounded like gunshots, short, direct, and impossible to ignore. When Donald Trump claimed to have ended 8 wars, the world stopped for a moment. It wasn't just a political statement. It was a challenge to history itself. After all, how many leaders can truly say they've ended wars? The phrase carried the weight of a promise and the echo of a provocation. For some, it was the symbol of a bold statesman. For others, the delirium of a man obsessed with shaping reality to his narrative. But in the end, no one remained indifferent. The paradox was irresistible. How could a man known for his aggressive rhetoric proclaim himself the harbinger of peace? Headlines were divided between irony and curiosity, and social media was abuzz with debate. Was Trump a brilliant manipulator, or simply someone who understood before everyone else that, in the information age, perception is the new weapon? The contradiction in this case wasn't a mistake. It was the fuel. And the more people doubted him, the more powerful his narrative gained. That's what this article delves into. The subtext of this explosive statement, the criticism it generated, and the subtle interplay between truth, image, and power. Because when a politician claims to have ended wars, perhaps he's not talking about tanks and rifles, but something much deeper, the war for the mind and collective memory. And if that's the case, perhaps the battlefield is still wide open. When Trump took the stage and declared, with his usual triumphant tone, that he had ended 8 wars, the audience reacted with a mixture of applause and disbelief. It was more than a catchy phrase. It was a political manifesto, a masterstroke in the art of capturing headlines. To some, it sounded like the cry of a hero who stood up to the system. To others, like yet another marketing ploy by a former president who knew how to turn controversy into fuel. The short and provocative phrase carried an embedded promise that the era of endless wars, so costly to the United States, was over. The problem is that, in international politics, the end is rarely so simple. Wars, like poorly healed wounds, leave traces that linger long after the last shot. Analysts and former diplomats were quick to ask, which wars exactly did Trump claim to have ended? The silence on the details only increased the noise of doubts. Every reporter seemed to have a different version, and the debate spread across the networks like wildfire. Still, there was something magnetic about the scene. Trump knew the weight of his words and the exact moment to deliver them. It was the kind of phrase that not only fueled headlines, but also reignited passions. In a way, he wasn't just talking about geopolitical wars. He was reigniting another battle, that of narrative, where truth and perception are in a constant duel. And of course, this battle was far from over. Trump has always understood that politics is, above all, spectacle. His narrative style blends exaggeration, theatrical timing, and an uncanny knack for transforming even controversy into political capital. When he says something like, "I ended 8 wars," he's not just informing, he's performing. It's the kind of phrase crafted to be remembered, shared, and above all, discussed. And at this, he's a master. Like a skilled salesman, he knows that perception is worth more than the product. And politics, after all, is about perceptions. His speech is constructed as a story of an American hero, the man who took on the system, defied generals, and restored dignity to forgotten America. Listening to him, it's easy to get swept up in the storyline. The businessman turned president who promised to bring the soldiers home. He transforms data into symbols, actions into narratives, and complex decisions into sentences simple enough to fit into a slogan. And let's face it, in the world of social media, simplicity is power. But this very simplicity is what raises suspicions. Critics point out that Trump's style of communication is less about facts and more about feelings. He masters the art of creating contrasts, us versus them, peace versus chaos, a strong America versus an unjust world. It's rhetoric that doesn't seek consensus, but rather emotional buy-in, and therein lies the secret. Those who listen don't need to agree, they just need to feel. And feeling, in this game, is what moves mountains, or perhaps what paves the way for the next narrative clash. When Trump mentioned the 8 wars that would have ended, many tried to piece together the puzzle. Which conflicts was he talking about after all? Some analysts cited Afghanistan and Iraq, the two most cherished ghosts of post-9/11 American policy. Others recalled Syria, Libya, Yemen, and even Somalia, places where the United States operated in the shadows, with drones, special forces, and fragile agreements. And of course, there were those who included Ukraine and North Korea, even though the confrontation there was more diplomatic than military. The count, therefore, varied depending on the enthusiasm, or convenience, of the interpreter. In Afghanistan, for example, Trump signed the Doha Agreement with the Taliban, promising to withdraw American troops, a powerful political gesture, though the execution and consequences were left to the next administration. In the case of North Korea, there was the historic spectacle of an American president shaking hands with Kim Jong-un. It was an unprecedented symbolic moment, but one that changed little in practice. Pyongyang's nuclear arsenal continued to grow, and the promise of total denuclearization became just another item in the wish list. The truth is that each end of war brought more rhetoric than resolution. In many cases, the troops left, but internal conflicts persisted. In others, the American absence created power vacuums, quickly filled by other powers. Thus, the phrase, "I ended 8 wars," sounded more like a political version of a movie trailer. Intense, heroic, but carefully edited. And like every trailer, it left the air filled with anticipation for what would come next, especially when the actual plot still seemed far from a happy ending. Diplomacy during the government, Trump was a spectacle in his own right. And, as with any spectacle, what was seen behind the scenes was quite different from what appeared on stage. On the one hand, there were historic meetings, such as the one with Kim Jong-un, that seemed to promise a new era of dialogue. On the other, there was constant pressure on NATO allies, the withdrawal of troops from unstable regions, and a foreign policy guided more by impulse than protocol. Trump was not a traditional diplomat. He acted like a businessman at a negotiating table. If the agreement didn't seem advantageous, he got up and walked away. Some of his moves, however, had real impact. In the Middle East, for example, the Abraham Accords marked an unexpected breakthrough in relations between Israel and Arab countries like the United Arab Emirates and Bahrain. A diplomatic feat that, under another administration, might have earned a Nobel Prize. But, as always, the devil is in the details. The agreements promoted rapprochement, but they didn't resolve core tensions or erase decades of mistrust. The stage was set. The photos were perfect, but the plot remained full of traps. Therefore, many analysts say Trump didn't end wars. He merely froze them, turning battles into negotiations and rifles into promises. It was a facade of peace, sustained by fragile agreements and personal agendas. Still, there was one merit. He brought the issue of peace to the center of American political discourse, something that rarely wins votes. And that's precisely where the next controversy begins. Because when peace talk comes from a man known for his confrontational rhetoric, the world begins to wonder what's really behind this apparent calm. Criticism was not long in coming. Jeer. And they came from all sides. The American press, always eager to decipher the subtext of Trump's every statement, treated the phrase, "I ended 8 wars," with a mixture of irony and suspicion. Military analysts claimed that no war had truly been ended, just redefined under new labels. Newspapers like New York Times and the Washington Post, they highlighted that while Trump had reduced direct U.S. involvement in certain conflicts, drone strikes and covert operations had increased. The rhetoric of peace, they argued, hid a different war, quieter but equally devastating. His fiercest critics accused him of using the word peace as a tool for self-promotion. They believed Trump had transformed pacifist rhetoric into a political product, sold with the same enthusiasm he used to sell his campaign slogans. America First, they said, wasn't about avoiding wars, but about redefining the terms on which they were fought. And while promising to bring soldiers home, he was signing billion-dollar arms deals with countries embroiled in regional conflicts, a contradiction that, at the very least, left the public divided between admiration and skepticism. Still, there were those who defended his vision, including former political enemies. Some observers argued that even with his excesses and impulses, Trump had challenged the logic of American interventionism and sparked a necessary debate. He might not have ended wars, but he had forced the world to rethink how they were conducted. And as critics continued to dissect his every sentence, a question echoed behind the scenes in Washington. Was he a fraud or a strategist who understood the power of controlling the narrative even before controlling the battlefield? When analyzing the legacy in Trump's military administration, the numbers tell a curious story. During his term, the number of American soldiers killed in combat was one of the lowest in decades, a figure he made a point of repeating in his speeches. On the other hand, the military budget reached record levels, surpassing $700 billion. It was a paradoxical combination: less blood, more spending. The rhetoric was for peace, but the investment suggested preparation for something greater. And this contradiction intrigued analysts and allies alike. After all, what was the true cost of Trumpist peace? On the human level, the equation was even more complex. The reduction of American military presence in foreign territories did indeed bring relief to many families. But in the affected countries, the troop withdrawal left power vacuums that were soon filled by local militias or rival forces. The result? A fragile peace, sustained by shaky agreements and the hope that chaos would not return. It was as if the dust had settled, but the embers remained burning underground. And in diplomacy, barely extinguished embers always flare up again. Trump liked to present himself as the president who brought our boys home, and indeed, part of that credit belongs to him. But the price of this withdrawal was paid in the most precious currency of geopolitics: influence. Each closed base, each strategic withdrawal also represented the loss of a piece on the global chessboard. The promise of peace, therefore, came with a new war, silent, economic, and ideological, that was still being waged behind the scenes. And it was precisely in this murky terrain that the former president seemed most at home, where diplomacy and strategy blended with political marketing. Trump has always understood the value, the symbolic power of words, and no word carries more political weight than peace. By using it, he spoke not only of the absence of conflict, but of narrative mastery. He transformed peace into a banner, a personal brand. It was a brilliant move. While other leaders sought legitimacy through treaties or military victories, he sought it through headlines. And it worked. Saying "I ended 8 wars" was not a literal statement, but an emotional one. He spoke to the collective unconscious of a people tired of funerals, debts, and endless interventions. This rhetoric earned him both passionate followers and fierce critics. To his supporters, he was the man who dared to challenge the military-industrial complex and break with the old political elite. To his detractors, he was an illusionist, capable of using the word peace as a smokescreen to hide power strategies. The truth, however, lay somewhere in between these extremes. Trump understood that, in a world saturated with information, it is not the truth that wins, but the narrative that most convinces. And peace was, for him, the most irresistible argument. Behind the scenes, the word continued to be used as a tool. Every speech about ending wars was also a message to the electorate and the world. I am different, unpredictable, and that makes me strong. Peace, in this case, ceased to be a moral ideal and became a geopolitical strategy. And like any strategy, it needed to be constantly nurtured, because in the end, maintaining the image of a peacemaker was more difficult than earning the title. And this struggle between image and reality is what would pave the way for the most dangerous judgment of all, that of history. Over the years, the phrase "final is, hey, 8 wars" has taken on a life of its own, echoing in debates like a modern legend. Half myth, half memory. For some historians, it represents the height of Trump-era political marketing, a powerful synthesis of charisma, exaggeration, and self-promotion. For others, it's a reflection of something larger, the human desire to believe that someone finally had the courage to pull the brakes on a system addicted to conflict. But when examined closely, one realizes that the supposed end of wars may have been just a change of scenery. The powder remains the same, only the script has changed. Still, it would be unfair to ignore the symbolic impact of his actions. Trump provoked the world to discuss the concept of peace from a new perspective, less idealistic, more pragmatic. His stance forced powers to rethink what winning means. Is it conquering territory or controlling narratives? Is it defeating enemies or avoiding political costs? From this perspective, Trump may not have ended 8 wars on the battlefield, but he did win one of them in the realm of communication. And let's face it, in this century, the information war is the one that most defines destinies. In the end, history's judgment is still being written. Some will see him as a fraud who peddled illusions, others as a leader who broke paradigms and forced the world to look at itself. Time will tell. What is certain is that the phrase, "I ended 8 wars," has already entered modern political folklore. And like every good story, it continues to grow, transform, and divide opinions. Because in the theater of global politics, the final act is never definitive, merely the prelude to the next clash. In the end, perhaps the greatest lesson behind this story isn't about Trump, but about us, about how much we allow ourselves to be guided by well-told narratives, by phrases that ring true even when they hide complexities. Wars in the 21st century are not fought solely with weapons, but with information, discourse, and perceptions. And those who understand this too early dominate the board before the first move is even made. Now the question is, would you know how to recognize the signs that a war is about to begin? I'm not just talking about conflicts between nations, but about the silent wars, political, economic, and even psychological, that unfold before our eyes. While many believe the world is experiencing a period of peace, others see only the silence before the storm. So, if you want to understand what really happens behind the scenes of power and learn to identify the movements that precede major conflicts, download the ebook now, 10 Signs That a War is About to Start. It will open your eyes to what most people prefer not to see, and prepare you to see the world with clarity, strategy, and awareness. Because in the information war, those who understand the signals are never caught off guard.